Hello, everyone. Welcome to our webinar. I'm Angelica Benson, Director of Development and Outreach for Lindamood-Bell Learning Processes. Today, we'll be talking about how our effective instruction can help your child learn this summer. Let's get started. At Lindamood-Bell, we believe passionately that children and adults can be taught to read and comprehend to their potential, including those students previously diagnosed with dyslexia, hyperlexia, and/or autism spectrum disorder. We believe this is particularly critical given the post-pandemic learning loss that's been affecting all students, particularly those with learning difficulties. In 2023, a global analysis found students lost a third of a school year's knowledge and skills due to the pandemic. Those children had not recovered from learning deficits more than 2 years later. Now in 2024, students continue to suffer from post-pandemic learning loss, and students with learning difficulties are further at risk for falling behind. Here's a student, Liam, who we were able to make a difference for. According to his teacher, nearly all the students in Liam's class were experiencing significant learning loss from their time remote. Liam, on the other hand, made significant gains. Liam was the only student in his class to read the words on the board, raise his hand to offer answers, and read aloud to his group. His confidence is soaring. And that was from Jenna, his mother. Our goal at Lindamood-Bell is to help every individual reach his or her potential to learn. Our efforts include learning centers, school partnerships, professional development workshops, and neurological and behavioral research. We were founded in 1986 by Patricia Lindamood, a licensed speech and language pathologist, and Nancy Bell, a reading specialist. Over the years, we've acquired instructional expertise as we've developed programs and refined the work that we do. In 2023 alone, in our 50 learning centers in the US, the UK, and Australia, we saw 3,034 students. We worked with students a total of 367,674 hours. In addition to that, we were able to gift 454 hours to students in need. We know through our years of work with students that in addition to reading improvements, sensory cognitive reading instruction can improve students' self-esteem and anxiety. And for those of you that might have missed a webinar on this very topic with Nancy Bell, our co-founder, I invite you to go to childmind.org, where you can hear a wonderful conversation with her talking about these important gains that we're seeing with these students. Let's get back to Liam. Liam's gains in basic skills represent typical gains after weeks of intensive instruction. We know we can conquer learning loss and improve basic skills in a few weeks with intensive instruction. What do we mean by intensive instruction? It's typically 4 hours a day, 5 days a week. And when we do that, we know the results are significant if that instruction is targeted to develop the sensory cognitive processing that's the foundation for language and literacy skills. Here's another story from a mom about her daughter who struggled to read. And she said, Lindamood-Bell changed my daughter's life. In the 9 weeks that she was here part-time, my child went from not recognizing single sight words to reading me a book at the 2nd grade level. Her daughter is not alone. She's among many students that we've helped to learn to their potential. How do we do it? Well, we know the brain can only receive information from our senses, and it is a multisensory organ. And it's this at the sensory cognitive level that Pat and Nancy have focused their work from the beginning. We know that the sensory cognitive functions are foundational to learning. Along Pat and Nancy's journey, they discovered these 3 pivotal sensory cognitive functions that we will be talking about today. The first is phoneme awareness, which is how well a student can identify the number, order, and identity of sounds within words. The second is symbol imagery, which is our ability to create mental imagery for sounds and letters within words. The last is concept imagery, how well we can create an imaged gestalt or a movie in our mind's eye for oral and written language. We know over the years, we've learned the sensory input of imagery is a primary sensory cognitive function. And we've learned that our instructional experience aligned with Dr. Alan Pavio's theory of cognition, known as dual coding theory. He stated that cognition is proportional to the extent that the coding mechanisms of mental representations or imagery and language are integrated. And when we dual code, this will enhance our performance in learning. Let's talk about the two types of imagery a little bit more. The first is imagery for parts, symbol imagery, and the second is imagery for wholes, concept imagery. Again, symbol imagery is imagery for the sounds and letters within words for decoding. In this instance, our student is imaging the letters for short, S-H-O-R-T. Concept imagery is an image whole for oral and written language comprehension. So in this instance, a student, rather than imaging letters, the student is imaging what is a radio clown, and you can see her imagery there. Let's put this together within the reading process. And we know that these sensory cognitive functions underlie the component parts of reading. We have the auditory, visual, and language domains in the center of our reading circles, which represent the specific areas needed to be developed and stable to be a good reader. The first area is the auditory domain. That's where word attack and phoneme awareness live. We also know that symbol imagery is critical to developing phoneme awareness and word attack skills. The second domain critical for reading is the visual area. This is important for word recognition, sight word acquisition, spelling, and we know that symbol imagery is a critical foundation for us to be able to do those things. Finally, we look at the language circle. That's where contextual reading and reading fluency come in, and we need our symbol imagery to be able to use those skills as well. Most importantly, I want to talk about the big red circle, comprehension, because of course our purpose to read is to comprehend. And we may have strength in those three inner circles and within phoneme awareness and symbol imagery, but that doesn't necessarily guarantee that we can comprehend. That's the role of concept imagery, how well we can image a movie or mental image for oral and written language. So when that's intact, that's what underlies our ability to comprehend. So we know we need all of these sensory cognitive functions working independently and together for us to be able to learn to our potential. I'm going to talk now about symbol imagery. Again, here's our student imaging the word for short, S-H-O-R-T. And when we develop this ability, we start with shorter words and we build their imagery to get to longer words, multisyllabic words over time. Doing so, we know, is building their orthographic memory so that they can quickly identify these words. What might this look like with a student? Well, I wanted to tell you Buzz's story. He was a 7th grader when we saw him, and his chronological age was 12 years and 5 months. Right? At the end of 6th grade, Buzz hated reading. Despite improved phonological processing, he still couldn't read text accurately and easily. His teacher said he can sound out words better, but he still can't read. Let's look at his learning ability evaluation, which is the tests we administered in order to determine his learning strengths and weaknesses. As you can see, he had some scores that were well above the average of the normal range, which is anything above the 75th percentile or higher. So he demonstrated a high degree of learning potential on receptive vocabulary here with the Peabody Picture Vocabulary Test. And because he had had so many reading programs that focused on sounding out words and phonological processing, he had a very significant strength there. However, when we got to reading on the page with him, both sight words as well as reading, here's reading on the page, you can see quite a lot of difficulty. Go down so you can see this a little better in reading rate, accuracy, fluency, and most importantly, comprehension. Students like Buzz have underlying symbol imagery weaknesses and phoneme awareness weaknesses. And here are the typical symptoms of weaknesses in these areas. So many students have weak word attack skills, unlike Buzz, but Buzz had years of practice in having to sound out words. However, that skill alone didn't guarantee, as we saw, reading fluency or comprehension. Weak word attack skills is often an indicator of a weakness in this area. Weak word recognition skills, which is how well they can identify words on the page, including acquisition and memorization of those high frequency words or sight words. We know that these students also, like Buzz, have slow and laborious decoding skills that contribute to guessing in contextual reading, and they may guess when they have particularly a strong receptive vocabulary. So he may not be able to read the word, but he can use his context cues and his vocabulary to guess that word. Weak phonological and orthographic spelling skills are common, such as this spelling for opportunity or this spelling for the word opportunity. They have difficulty reading fluently in context. They have difficulty monitoring and self-correcting reading and spelling errors. And if these are severe enough weaknesses, these students may have had prior diagnosis of dyslexia. Now that we have talked about symbol imagery, let's shift gears and talk about concept imagery, which again is an imaged whole or gestalt for comprehension and thinking. Students that have difficulty with concept imagery tell us that the language goes in one ear and out the other and doesn't stick. These students may grasp parts and pieces and random details of the language, but have a difficult time grasping the main idea and putting it all together. Once they are able to image that language, it's the concept imagery that prevents the language from going in one ear and out the other. From that imaged whole or gestalt, we are able then to build in higher order thinking skills, including main ideas, conclusions, inferences, predictions, and evaluations. And here's a student that had these difficulties. Meet Natalie. She was 7th grade when we saw her, and she was 11 and 10 months old. Although Natalie had easily learned to read words in her early grades, by 4th grade, she was sick before going to school, and moving her to the front of the classroom didn't help her performance. Here is her learning ability evaluation, and you can see most of the scores are well above even that average range, which is between the 25th and the 75th percentile. Here, let me get this here so we can see all of the strong skills she has in word attack skills, word recognition, reading rate, accuracy, and fluency. However, when we asked her to comprehend what she read, you can see she was at the 2nd percentile. All right, so what was happening for a student like Natalie? And so many of the students that we see, they have weak concept imagery, which may manifest in these difficulties. They may have weak written language comprehension, just like Natalie. They may have weak oral language comprehension in conversation. They may have difficulty with critical and logical thinking and problem solving. They may have difficulty with following directions. Of course, that requires us to sequence parts of language together into a gestalt or a whole. So that is often an area of need. These students have difficulty with expressing language orally, difficulty with expressing language in writing, difficulty with social situations, interpreting them, and difficulty understanding abstract concepts and reasoning, including cause and effect. And we often see if this weakness is severe enough, they may have had numerous prior diagnoses, which may include autism spectrum disorder, ADHD, and hyperlexia. So let's put this together. Let's talk about imagery and what we call our language processing spectrum. Because this is a continuum where students can have a mild, moderate, or severe weakness in these areas, this is our spectrum to illustrate that. In students, we find here on the left are weak with decoding, so they may fall somewhere along this spectrum. At the far left are the typical students we see with dyslexia. Meanwhile, we have over here on the right side comprehension. And that, of course, is underlined by concept imagery. And you could have a mild, moderate, or weak difficulty here if you are struggling in a significant way, you may have also had a diagnosis of autism. So you can see we have that noted there. How do we conquer learning losses this summer? The first step is to come into Lindamood-Bell for a learning ability evaluation. What is a learning ability evaluation? It's a diagnostics battery of assessments. It will give us indicators of a child's strengths and weaknesses. And from that information, we can recommend differentiated instruction, individualized for each student, based on their learning profile. The goal is to then change those weak areas into a strengths. So after students come in for instruction, we actually give them a post-test or post-diagnostic LAE, as we call this, so that we can look at learning gains and growth over time. Marion Elementary principal, who brought her daughter in, said, "This is like getting a fingerprint of your child's unique learning profile." After the learning ability evaluation, the next step is to come in for individualized intensive instruction. And we do have an opportunity to enroll students in the summer today. So I'd love to encourage you, if you have questions about that process or what this might look like for your student, please put your questions into the chat below, and we will have a team of instructors on hand to respond to you and follow up accordingly. When students come in, you can anticipate that it will be one-on-one, 5 days per week, typically 4 hours a day. That may be modified based on the specific needs of the student. Here's a student, Nico. Many times families ask us about a summer program and is it enough time to really make a difference? Nico said, "When I was in first grade, I had a very hard time learning to read. My parents sent me to a reading summer camp at Lindamood-Bell. Their positive way of teaching changed my life and taught me how to read. Their teaching method really helped me feel a lot more positive about reading and just in general. They made me feel a lot more confident as a learner and more comfortable in school the following year. It's teachers like them that make all the difference. Their influence will last a lifetime. I will always be grateful and I will never forget them." What type of instruction did Nico receive? He received our Seeing Stars program, which is designed to develop symbol imagery in students. That program uses specific language to direct students to their imagery and to identify it at a conscious level. So here's Nancy Bell asking the student, what letters do you picture for IP? The student with good symbol imagery is able to put letters together in their mind's eye to see IP, and then identify each one in sequence individually. That's just an example for you. When these students get further into the process, we're able to develop orthographic memory, and we use specific questions to help do that. So here, our Nancy Bell is saying, "What was the second letter that you saw?" And our student is saying, "The letter is East," and they're seeing EAST, and they're able to identify the second letter A. So that's going to really strengthen your orthographic memory for those words. Eventually, over time, we find that this ability to image symbols can generalize over to all kinds of words, those at the single syllable level, and we teach students to image all the way up to the multisyllabic levels. What type of results do we typically see with these students? Well, this is 10,796 students like Buzz, who had on average 112 hours of intervention, and on average they were a little younger than Buzz. They were 9.5, almost 9 and 6 months. What we're seeing here, all of our reading measures that we want to look at are across the bottom. The light blue is showing these students prior to intervention, and the dark blue is our retest scores after they've come in for instruction. And our goal is to see where they are weak, which would be anything at the 37th percentile and below. Sometimes the cutoff is 25th percentile, but at Lindamood-Bell, we find even at the 37th percentile, those students are starting to show weaknesses in performance. And our goal is to push that into the average or normal range, which is up to the 75th percentile. So it's right here and even above. So what you're seeing here is after 112 hours, when we're able to develop symbol imagery for reading, there is a significant increase in all of these reading measures: symbol imagery, phoneme awareness, word attack, word recognition, reading accuracy, fluency, and written language comprehension and vocabulary as well. All of these gains were statistically significant. This is 3,034 students that came to us with a prior diagnosis of dyslexia. We see students with dyslexia of all ages, even college students and adults. This population on average was 10 years old, and they had 123 hours of instruction. Again, what we wanted to look at is, were we able to make a difference and bring their scores from within the 25th to the 75th percentile or above? And you can see across the board, pre-test to retest, all of these improvements brought these scores into the average or normal range. Accuracy and fluency, you can see here, just like in the other slide, we made statistically significant gains. We did not see those come into the average or the normal range yet, and I will say yet, because typically these students that are that low need a little bit more time in instruction. So this is a snapshot. We follow that up a little further, and we often see that this growth continues into that range. All right. I hope everyone's with me. We're going to talk about concept imagery, and this is the kind of instruction that a student like Natalie would have had. And it's where we have, here's our Nancy Bell ask, what do those words make you picture? And that helps to direct the student to their imagery in their mind's eye. And we have them say, I picture a rodeo clown. And we may ask them to generate the color, the size, the movement, all of the things that compose the imagery for a rodeo clown, just so we can check that they're making an image and they've got intact concept imagery. And then we apply that from single words all the way up to whole sentences, multiple sentences, paragraphs, and whole pages. You'd be amazed at the kind of impact we can make. If you're curious, I've got some data to share. This is students like Natalie. On average, they were age 12. They were getting about 103.8 hours on average, and this was 6,462 of these students. And again, you can see pre-post measures for vocabulary, word opposites, and written language comprehension. All of these we brought into that average or normal range, and these gains were all statistically significant. Lastly, we wanted to share some data on students that are what we would call most severe. And these are students that had a high level of reading, above the 75th percentile, but their comprehension was below the 25th, much like Natalie. These students, 848 of them, on average 9.6 in age, after 105 hours of instruction, were also able to make significant progress, both in vocabulary and written language comprehension, all of which were statistically significant. All right. Here's a quote from a mother, Sarah. Her daughter struggled with comprehension, and we typically see these students may fly under the radar and may be harder to detect than a student who struggles with reading. Often these students, furthermore, may memorize language and can oftentimes mask this difficulty. So Sarah said, the daughter that I see now loves to read. Lindamood-Bell was able to provide the right setting, instructors, and resources to aid in her comprehension deficit and build her self-esteem that was robbed by years of wrong placement and diagnosis. In conclusion, I'd like to leave you with a few final thoughts. Here we are back to our imagery and language processing spectrum. If you're a parent, ask yourself, does your child have difficulties more like Buzz, more like Natalie? And as I alluded to, we have students that have weaknesses in both areas. So they may have weaknesses in symbol imagery and concept imagery. We can help you to identify those weaknesses and put together an effective plan for summer instruction to help your child learn to their potential. I'd like to leave you with a summation of today's webinar. We know if we measure learning ability, differentiate the diagnosis, and provide instruction to develop the sensory cognitive function of imagery, students can make significant gains in reading in weeks of instruction, conquer learning loss this summer, and experience more success in school. Thank you again. We hope to see you this summer. Bye-bye.